Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Misael Diaz. I'm an assistant professor of art, media, and design here at Cal State San Marcos on behalf of the Resounding Visions curatorial team, which also includes AMD professor Christine Diekman and AMD faculty instructors Ana Luisa Patrishko and Jeffrey Ray. We wanted to begin today's presentation with a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that I'll be speaking tonight from the unceded territory of the Luiseño Payamcowicham peoples, and that the meeting place of Cal State San Marcos and its surrounding areas is still home to the 6 federally recognized bands of the La Jolla, Pala, Pama, Pachanga, Rincon, Soboba Luiseño Payamcowicham people. I would like to take this moment to acknowledge and express our appreciation and respect for those groups whose homelands we reside and learn on, recognizing that they are stewards of this land from time immemorial, in spite of the ongoing violence of settler colonialism. Given that we're not all together for this session, I invite you to look into whose ancestral homelands you reside on by consulting the resources that I'll be sharing in the chats as just an initial first step in recognizing the resilience and strength of Indigenous communities and also expressing solidarity with efforts to undo their intentional erasure. So let me go ahead and pop in these resources into the chat here for you all to consult. And we can go ahead and get started. So welcome again to our 4th session of the Spring 2022 season of Resounding Visions. This is a year-long series hosting Black, Indigenous, and people of color artists, musicians, and scholars who work at the intersection of sound and art to explore forms of cultural resistance and affirmation. I wanted to extend a very special thank you to Steve and Laura Wagner and the Epstein Family Foundation for the generous funding that makes these events possible, and also want to express a sincere thank you to the School of Arts staff, especially Albert Rascon, for their continued support as part of every session. Before introducing today's guest speaker, I wanted to let you all know that in lieu of using the chat to share questions and or comments with our presenter, we ask that you please use the Q&A function. We're going to be shutting down the chat shortly. So if you have questions or comments, please type those into the Q&A and we will address those after today's presentation by Alan Nakagawa, which will last approximately 45 minutes, I'd say. Afterwards, we'll be opening it up to questions and comments. I'll be reading those out loud from the Q&A for our presenter to respond to. So again, want to encourage you to please use the Q&A, and we're more than happy to get to all of your questions and all of your comments. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Alan Nakagawa. Alan Nakagawa is an interdisciplinary artist with archiving tendencies, primarily working with sound and often incorporating various media and working also with communities. Nakagawa has been working on semi-autobiographic sound architecture and tactile sound experiences, utilizing multi-point audio field recordings of historic interiors. These include piece Resonance, which explores the Hiroshima Wendover connections between the Hiroshima Atomic Dome in Hiroshima, Japan, and the Wendover Hangar in Utah, Conical Sound, which focuses on the Antoni Gaudi and Simon Rodia, combining recordings, focusing on their work and combining recordings of Watts Towers in LA and the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Spain. He's in his 4th year as artist in residence at the Pasadena Buddhist temple through Site Street projects, developing multidisciplinary art projects in response to the history of the temple and the post-World War II Japanese American community it was founded by. He was the first artist in residence for the LA Department of Transportation and the Los Angeles County Library. He's been invited by the Smithsonian Museum of American History to research the developments of the hearing aid in the US, and he currently resides in LA's Koreatown and continues to exhibit and develop his creative practice. He is scheduled to be published and featured. His first book is scheduled to be published by Writ Large Press in the fall of 2022, mapping his artistic trajectory that led to his 9 artist in residencies in 6 years. And he's also the recipient of 2 Art Matters grants, a City of LA Artist Fellowship, California Community Foundation Mid-Career Artist Fellowship, and a Mombushu Scholar. We're so excited to have him joining us tonight. So please welcome Alan Nakagawa.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Let's see. share screen. Oh, what did I do? Participants can see your screen. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's not what I want. Okay. Hi everyone. So great to be here. I wish I was actually there, but I'm here in my little living room in Koreatown. I'm gonna talk briefly about my past. I've been very fortunate or privileged to have some amazing mentors. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but many, if not most of my mentors, and certainly the key mentors, have been artists of color. That's probably part of growing up in Los Angeles. So I would say my first art teacher was a Japanese painter from Tokyo, and she happened to move here to Los Angeles, and I studied with her for something like 9 years, painting basically. And then I studied music, had a drum teacher, and then a friend of the family was a jazz composer, pianist, named Horace Tapscott, and he's the one who actually introduced me into recording, which became kind of my instrument of choice, if you will. And I went to art school just like you guys, and had met some amazing artists. One of my early mentors, and somebody who would be a mentor for me for many years, is a muralist, Professor Judith F. Baca. And I eventually worked for her at the Social and Public Art Resource Center, and learned a lot about mural making and community building and consensus building, which I would later start to use in my own work. There was a group of us early on called Collage Ensemble, and if you go to my website, there's a whole thing on this group. Started in 1984, and it ended in 2011. And basically, we would get together and start talking about our experiences in Los Angeles. We're artists of color. The photo that you see here is Alessandra Montezuma, Steve Irvin, Brandy Maya Healy, and myself. This is actually a reunion that happened in 2019. So we were much younger when when we collaborated. But this is not the only version of Collage Ensemble. Many artists came and went through the group during those years. And, I was lucky enough to work with all of them. So it's always good to have good friends who support you and to brainstorm with them and collaborate. We did multimedia experimental work about basically the multi-ethnic experience. And I'm gonna jump many years into this. So Organ of Cordy, this is in 2013. I started, we ended the group, and then I started to do my solo work. And I was very interested in how we hear and the mechanism of hearing. I had this experience of meeting an artist, a student at one of my lectures, and turns out she was deaf. I didn't know there was a student who was deaf in the class. And later she came up with her translator and said, I liked your lecture, but whenever you would play a piece of music, I couldn't hear it. So next time you might ask if there's a deaf person in the audience and bring balloons, and then you could pass the balloons out, and we could blow up the balloons, and the balloons will capture the frequency. So at least we can experience the music that way. That literal 5-minute, probably wasn't even 5 minutes, but that very short little experience meeting this student changed my life, changed the trajectory of my work. I started to realize, I started to cultivate this idea that we don't hear with our ears, we hear with our bodies. And so it took decades for this to sink in and become part of my practice. But the organ of Corti was sort of step one, if you will. So the organ of Corti is the fibrous coil within the cochlea in your ear. It's actual organ that translates the sound wave into electrons, which of course is the language of the brain. And so it's kind of like a microphone, the way the microphone picks up sound waves in the air and then translates those into electricity, right? And that's how that becomes the mechanism of recording, for instance, or amplification, and these sorts of things. And I was kind of interested how the body had created that, and how sound is predicated not just on how the organ of Corti works, but how the body works in collaboration with the organ of Corti. And so I started working with the idea of vibratory sound. And this is an example of a piece. This was an installation that I did. And it was an homage to Nancy Holt, who had passed away. Nancy Holt is one of my favorite artists. She is primarily known as an earthwork artist, and perhaps her most famous piece is Sun Tunnels in Utah. And these are aluminum beds that I had fabricated, and then I put speakers in the bed. So you lie down in the bed, and you know that bone in the back of your skull, that sort of pointy, when that hits the aluminum, the vibrations that the speaker is projecting enters the marrow of your bone system. So you're lying down and you become, in a sense, the speaker, the conduit for sound. Of course, you also have a balloon. We also recommend that you put earplugs in so that you're really focusing on the vibration of sound rather than just the audibility of sound. Or another way to look at it is I'm changing or expanding the notion of what audibility is. And so there's that. Then I'm going to skip over a couple of years and go here. So this piece is called Mudsling, and it was a piece that I was inspired by this 6-week artist residency I went to in New Hampshire. I'd never really been to New England before. It was also kind of the summer, and it was raining all the time. And this was, 2016. So it was in the crux of the drought that we have here in Southern California. So it was amazing to be in an environment that rained all the time, was very green. So I did a stereo recording of one of the thunderstorms that we experienced at this art colony. And then when I came home, I processed that. I added some Foley work, some frequency enhancements, and I sort of played with it a little bit. And then I did this piece. It's sort of an extension of the aluminum beds. This time it's kind of an obelisk, if you will. And when you come up to it, you can hear that there's some sound. You don't exactly know what it is, but it sounds organic. And then when you lie down, again, when that back of your skull, that pointy part hits the aluminum, it's as if you were inside of a rainstorm. And that's the best way I can describe that. So it's a very kind of sensational and transformative tactile experience of sound. And, around that time, I was asked to, I'm just going to point, I'm not going to click on it, but this Myth Not Myth, I was asked to do a mini residency at the Getty Villa. I think it was my first solo residency. And I really enjoyed it so much. I've been a fan of the Getty Villa from especially a conservation standpoint. And so my proposal was, can I go play in the conservation with the conservation people? And can I meet the curators and stuff? You know, it's the area where it says employees only. So I got to go past that gate, and then I met the staff, and I started interviewing the staff. And from that series of interaction, it's kind of the behind the scenes, if you will. I developed 5 different interactive pieces which we exhibited at the Getty Villa. And that was kind of a wonderful taste of, oh, if I hang out with this institution, if you will, or this organization, I could really learn a lot of stuff firsthand. And then because I'm an artist, of course, they want me to develop work. I really kind of loved doing that. And that's when the LADOT, Los Angeles Department of Transportation opportunity, when that call went out, and then, you know, I got it. And so I got to spend a year with that staff. And then all these other artist residencies started becoming available. And I, you know, extremely privileged to work with all these wonderful, wonderful organizations. So I'm going to fast forward a couple of years, and now I'm at the Pasadena Buddhist Temple. So within 4 or 5 years, I actually got to do 8 different artist residencies, and they ranged from 3 months to a year and a half. And after that, I kind of thought, boy, you know, it takes about a year for you to really understand the culture of an institution. Often my contract would be up, and it's kind of like the moment, the aha moments, like, oh, I get this place. Now I want to do these projects. I have these ideas now, but then your contract is up, and then you leave. And I kind of put it out there that I would like to have a residency that was more than a year. Actually, I would like a multi-year residency. And kind of miraculously, the Pasadena Buddhist Temple, through Sci Street Projects. Sci Street Projects is a arts organization here in Los Angeles. You know, I was kind of lucky, and they asked me to come over. And I've been working with this community that was kind of created by a Japanese American group of families that had been interned during World War II for being Japanese, basically. And after they were let out of those prisons, then this particular group found themselves in Pasadena, that they could actually buy property, even though there was kind of a anti-Japanese sentiment still, you know, after World War II. They were able to go into the areas that, you know, through the Red Line, primarily African-American communities, and they were able to buy houses there and bring up their families. Well, this is the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. So since then, we're probably into the 3rd generation of that group, and things have changed. There's a lot less Japanese families in that area now. And there's all this hidden history in this temple that I've discovered through doing interviews, oral histories, going through family archives, primarily photos, and just asking lots of questions and listening to people tell their story. And you know, I'm in my 4th year, and I'm kind of still digesting what's going on. And in June, we'll start phase 3. And phase 3 will be very different from phase 1 and 2, which was primarily what I just mentioned, you know, meeting people, interviewing them, and sort of responding with art projects. Phase 3, we're going to actually hire 2 scholars, and the scholars will come and work with us on developing kind of critical papers about what we're doing there. what is the effect of art in a culture that is in a particular part of its timeline, if you will. And then there's an organization, a wonderful organization called the Asian American Justice and Innovation Lab. And they're going to come in and curate a series of lectures that support the work of these two scholars. So that's the next 3 years. You know, we're projecting the next 3 years. So if that's the end of my residency, it'll be a total of 7 years, which is so, you know, I feel very lucky to have that potential in my future. I'm going to talk about I'm sorry, wait, what did I say? Oh, 3 more projects. Okay. So as of last week, I am now the artist in resident of the LA Free Press Art Kunken Archive. Just started, so I don't have anything on this website, but that's a copy of the LA Free Press. This particular one is dated, I believe it's 1968. LA Free Press was the socialist newspaper of Los Angeles, started by Art Kunken. Art Kunken was a socialist. He was actually part of the Communist Party when he lived in Detroit, worked with Lee Boggs and Grace Lee Boggs. They unionized the mechanics at Chrysler and Ford. And then after that, he comes to Los Angeles. He starts the LA Free Press. In recent years, he passed away, and the Girth Archives at Cal State Dominguez Hills acquired all of his work. And they recently, when I say recently, I mean like 3 days ago, they hired me to become the artist in resident for this archive. So I don't have a lot to share, but you know, that's kind of very new in my life. So I wanted to celebrate that. Here's a project. So this project is kind of this amazing new young organization called Prospect Art. And Prospect Art chooses an artist, asks for them to propose a project, and then they fund the project. That's sort of the apparatus of the apparatus of Prospect Art. So my project is Point of Turn. And it's a very simple project in that I'm asking people who used to be with a religious organization to share the experience that kind of pushed them to the edge of leaving that religious organization. In a sense, what is the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will? And so, you know, so far we've collected over 20 of these amazing stories. And if you know of anybody who might want to share, they could share it anonymously. That's fine. We totally respect that. But you could click on this thing here, Prospect Art, or here, and there's a very simple format of how you can share. You can send us the text of the story, or you could record it on your phone and send us the MP3. I'm going to take all of that work, all of those stories, and create a sound piece. The sound piece will live on Prospect Art's website, but we will have one live performance of it somewhere in Los Angeles in the near future. My thought is I'm agnostic. I'm not really part of a religious organization, but I've always been interested in religion, and I'm especially interested in these stories that I've heard throughout my life of people leaving their religion. They're always, or they're often very powerful. And so my thought, kind of a very pagan thought, a very agnostic thought, was if I collected all of those stories, those moments, and then created a sound experience with those, that could possibly become a religious moment. So that's another project. And then the third project, and I've not shared this with a lot of people because it's really brand new. But I'm very excited, and it has a little bit to do with Professor Diaz's future trajectories for his curriculum. Asian American futurism. So I recently was in a show at the USC Pacific Asia Museum. In a nutshell, I created a spaceship. And so I had a year to create the spaceship and all the accoutrements for the spaceship, including a narrative. And I just found, I was kind of shocked that there wasn't that much information online, or at least I couldn't find very much about Asian American futurism. There's a lot about Asian futurism. There's obviously a lot about Afrofuturism, etc. But in my persona, my background, I was just, how come there's not anything under, or not very much about Asian American futurism? And so I went online and I typed it into the URL thing, and it's available. I was like, oh my God, it's available. So I bought it, and then I made this website. So these are kind of the trajectories I'm thinking about. This is, I'm got to be upfront. It's like, this is my attempt to engage, contribute to the Asian American futurist dialogue. This is certainly not a comprehensive look at that terminology, but it's something that I initiated, and I'm in the process of getting into. I've started a little list of people, artists, primarily, some writers, some curators, just folks that I know of, and I think their work might possibly help define Asian American futurism. I'm actually in the process of interviewing some of these folks. There is a YouTube channel, and I eventually will edit these interviews for the YouTube channel. These are my development notes. So these are references that have helped me shape my version of what I think Asian American futurism is. Here's some facts. And then this is sort of like an ongoing note thing that for me that I've created. It's not exactly a poem, but it's kind of like a poem. And these are my projects that I feel could possibly fall under the title of Asian American futurism. And what else? I think that's it. But this is something, is literally like a month old, and I'm just we're in the embryonic stage of this idea. I think that's it. That's pretty good. We could stop there. How long has it been? Been a half hour? No, something.
No, you were breezing through things, but yeah, I don't know if you want to speak about other work, Alan. You still have plenty of time, or if not, there's also questions that we can turn to, student questions.
You know what it is I did that presentation to the class earlier this week to Jeffrey. Yeah, and so I was trying not to do any of the projects that I talked about, but probably none of these students are in that class, right?
Yeah, this is a different class.
Okay, yeah, so why would I do that? Okay, then.
Well, can I prompt you?
Yeah,
with the project, Ellen? So we took a look at.
There's a question here.
Yeah, I think it's just a comment.
Oh.
From Jack, who mentions it's amazing how just a short exchange with the student could influence your sound so much. I think referring to that notion of figuring out ways of listening that go beyond
Absolutely
one's ears. And I think that was fascinating. And I think the other thing that I think we were briefly chatting about is that we've been taking a look at artworks and methodologies that really think about establishing these links between the past and the present, and also the present and the future. So I think this notion of Asian American futurism is definitely thinking about the future in a way that's really interesting and resonant with a lot of the ideas that we've been discussing. But I wonder if you could also maybe speak a little bit about the work that you've done in relation to sound in buildings that kind of contain these complicated and complex histories. Specifically, I shared with my students the work that you had done in piece resonance. And a lot of students were really taken by that work. And we had a few questions that came up relating to
Oh,
that piece in particular. So I don't know if you maybe just want to speak about that one, and then we can dive
sure.
into some of the questions. And
Oh,
also, just as a reminder, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat, and we can get to those after we hear about peace resonance.
okay. So peace resonance. So let's see. My family's from Hiroshima, and they came here in 1957. So there's a lot of information on that, like why did they come, and there wasn't much happening in Hiroshima, I guess. And my grandfather had like an opportunity to work in the produce district here in Los Angeles since he had import-export experience. He did well enough to send for the whole family to come. And not too much after that, I was born. And I always knew we were from Hiroshima, but they never really talked about it very much. They just wanted to become Americans and assimilate into this culture and do well. And but it was always there. It was always, there were friends of the family who were hibakusha, which basically means, atomic bomb survivors. One in particular was a advocate for peace and did a lot of work to get, I think it was every 4 years, to get doctors from Japan to come here and do checkups of all the hibakushas who lived in the United States. And so her name was, she passed away unfortunately, Kasieshi. And so, I grew up in this environment. And then when I became an artist, I kind of felt like, oh, I probably need to do a piece about the atomic bomb, or the peace museum and whatnot. It took me 30 years to think of an idea that I felt was exciting enough to pursue. And the way it happened was, I had mentioned earlier that Nancy Holt passed away. And ironically, I didn't know Nancy Holt. I knew of her work, but I became friends with her friends, basically. And when she passed away, because I was so interested in earthworks, they invited me to Nancy Holt's memorial. At the time, that was crazy, but as I think about it today, it's still crazy. It's like, why did they? It's amazing that they invited me to that. And so there is a organization here in Los Angeles, kind of adjacent to Culver City, called the Center for Land Use Interpretation. And they have a museum here, a gallery and a library, but they also have an artist residency in Utah. And close to this residency is Sun Tunnels, Nancy Holt's Sun Tunnels. So the memorial took place at Sun Tunnels. So the night before the memorial, we're at the residency, eating hot dogs and talking. And I'm just listening because everyone's talking about Nancy Holt, right? So I wanna like hear stories about her, because I love her work so much. And I still can't believe I was there. And then I look across the chain link and there's like an airfield, and there's this beautiful rusty old Quonset, like huge Quonset building. And I said to Matthew, who helps run Cluey, Matthew Coolidge, I said, hey man, that's a cool looking building. And then Matt goes, oh, Alan, do you know what that is? And I go, no, what is that? And he goes, that's the Wendover hangar. I go, what's that? He goes like, that's the hangar that the Enola Gay flew out and went to Hiroshima and dropped the bomb and ended World War II. And I said, oh, did you know my family's from Hiroshima? And then Matt goes, oh, dude, you got to do a project with that hangar. Um, so I was sleeping, and then it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up all of a sudden, and I had this idea. I had been to the Hiroshima Peace Park before, in Hiroshima, and I've been to the museum, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could record inside the atomic dome and then process that into a 3-speaker installation, and then bring that to the Wendover hangar and perform it inside the Wendover hangar. And it took me 3 years to finish this project, but luckily a lot of people got it. It's kind of an idea that if I just communicate it once, everyone sort of gets it, which is key to how this actually all happened. If it was complicated or esoteric or conceptually complicated, probably wouldn't have gotten approval. But because it's so simple and to the point, I think everyone understood it. Again, it did take 3 years, but I eventually got permission to go inside the atomic dome. Here's me in the atomic dome, which of course is a UNESCO heritage site governed by the United Nations. And so not everyone gets to go in the atomic dome. There's a lot of bureaucracy that takes place. Very few people have gotten permission to go into the atomic dome. So I, felt very privileged to be in there. And we did my recording. I brought it home and I worked on it. And then I eventually got approval to go inside the Wendover hangar, do the same thing, 3-point recording, and then I mashed them. So the Peace Resonance is actually a mashup. I'm mashing the acoustic field recording, 3-dimensional field recording of these two interiors. And then after I finished that, then I got permission to actually perform that piece. It was a private performance, but I brought my equipment back to Utah, and then we performed it inside the hangar, and then we recorded that. And so when people experience Peace Resonance, they're experiencing this mashup. And we've been very, very lucky. We've presented it at the Orange County Museum as an installation and a performance. It was part of the Under a Mushroom Cloud, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Atomic Bomb exhibit at the Japanese American National Museum. I performed it at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. In the future, I would love to perform it at Pearl Harbor. And I'm already working with the Smithsonian on possibly performing it in front of the Enola Gay, which is the bomber that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. In a nutshell, this is simply my portrait of what it's like to be Japanese American post World War II. So that's what Peace Resonance is. Peace Resonance, Hiroshima Window. It spawns from a project I did earlier called Conical Sound. Simon Rodia and Tony Gaudi. Where is it? Did I pass it? I think I passed it. Sorry. Hope you're not getting dizzy. Oh, here we go. So when I was in the 4th grade, I was in the library looking through a picture book and really enjoying the pictures. It was a collection of Antoni Gaudi's work in Barcelona. And then I thought, hey, this guy kind of ripped up Simon Rodia. I was in the 4th grade, so I was about 9 years old. And of course, that's not true, but that's what I was thinking. And later, decades later, I was given this opportunity to go to some artist residency anywhere in the world. I could pick or create an artist residency. This was through Cultural Affairs City of LA. And I was thinking back to that when I was in the 4th grade in the library, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to go into the Sagrada Familia and do a 3-part recording in there, and then match it up with the acoustics of Watts Towers. And that happened. So I was able to get permission, working through the University of Barcelona. This is actually a picture of professors and grad students from the Sound Arts Master's program at the University of Barcelona. They helped me. They were very, very, very wonderful people. And this is the day that or evening that we were given permission to do the recordings. We did the 3-point recordings on the 30 meters, the 15 meters, and on the floor. And it was an amazing experience. I came back to Los Angeles, got permission to do something similar at Watts Towers. And sorry, this is all the Sagrada stuff. You know, it's so easy to be gaga about the Sagrada Familia. All of Gaudi's work is phenomenal. Look at that. That's the parachuting Jesus that it hangs over the altar. This is my friend Tom Clancy. He made the documentary about the whole project. That's oh, I'm blanking out. Sorry. Anyway, this is us at Watts Towers. So we did a 3-point recording at Watts Towers, and then we also put contact mics on the towers and got a recording of the moving of these big old towers. And that was also a wonderful experience too. This is how I kind of diagram these projects out. So I have some sort of, I call them sound maps, and they help me figure out what I need to record. And then later, how do I mix it? How do I mix it down? So this is the one for Conical Sound as I think a performative piece. I actually have presented this in various forms several times. We do it on time. Oh, 6:20. I think that might be a good place to end, right? And then we go to like Q&A.
Yeah, definitely. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Alan, for sharing that.
Sure.
And just a reminder, if anyone has any questions for Alan, please type those into the Q&A and we'll get to those. I had shared some of those case studies with my students, and many of them were just very excited about these different approaches to not just listening, but also thinking about silence, or like what we can maybe think of as silence. Like in these buildings, it's not that you're maybe like recording a particular like sound, but rather the building itself. And I think reframing this notion of silence was something that came up for several students, and the way that I guess that relates to history. So one of the more provocative and like poetic questions that I received, I just wanted to kind of start off with that.
Yeah.
Was by McKenna. She asks, it's a several parter.
Okay.
So you can kind of respond to whichever question is most evocative. But she asks, do you think that good sounds can be captured anywhere, or do you think that richer sounds come from structures with more history? How do you think a building's history changes the sounds it creates? And is it possible for silence to be a sound as well?
You know, my grandmother was Shinto. That was the religion that she was. Every Sunday she'd go to that Shinto that Shinto church, I guess, in Boyle Heights. So she was always there. And I didn't know anything about Shintoism until recently. I kind of, not that I'm studying it, but I'm learning a little bit more. And the Shintos believe that there's a spirit in everything. like, everything's got a spirit. And one of the things that I often share is this idea of the Japanese carpenters, long ago, when the carpenters would nail something or, put something into wood, like when they were building something, or they, even though the tree is dead, right? But they still felt the spirit of the tree was still in there. So every time they hit it with the hammer, they would quietly apologize. And I love that image, So I guess, and I admit, it's a romantic view, but I think, the older something is, the more interesting it is. I think that's true. I at the Buddhist temple, for that residency, I'm spending most of my time with elderly folks, retired senior citizens, as old as, as elderly as in their 90s, right? And the stories they have, even especially the ones who feel like they don't have an interest, they didn't have an interesting life, it's just, they've had interesting lives, they just, there's so much there. There's so much. So when I was in the Sagrada Familia, as you can see, I was there with a lot of people. There were about 12 of us, I think. And so the nature of how I record is, I have 3 teams, and then each have a tripod with a recorder on it. And then they go to, strategic places inside the building. And then we have walkie-talkies. And so we're able to talk to each other. And then I tell them, okay, please start recording now. And usually I like to record for 17 minutes. Why 17 minutes? It's probably my favorite prime number. So that's kind of the only reason we pick 17 minutes. But 17 minutes is always like, there's always enough sound for me. And then when you put it into the computer, you can really kind of jimmy it. Like maybe the first minute's not interesting, but you got 17 minutes, you got plenty, to like splice. So I like 17 minutes, but that means we all have to be quiet for 17 minutes. And being quiet for 17 minutes in a Catholic church like the Sagrada Familia is like a religious experience. It's like very Zen and kind of, you just automatically become meditative and you start thinking about things, but you gotta be quiet. And I think stuff happened, especially at 30 meters. We think there's a ghost in there. Not 100% sure, but we think so. Stuff happened, man. It was pretty wild. And so when you have experiences like that, it's always good to ask for permission. Is it okay if we record? We're going to record. I hope it's okay. And usually, it's okay. But sometimes it's not okay. And they'll tell you that's often when the equipment fails. So so I like that. I don't think you're going to get that kind of experience in a new place. I like old places. I put here in the chat the link. The link to the LA Times article that came out today. So it's an interview between me and Devin Suno, but I haven't read it yet. But I believe from the title that it talks about how I'm interested in archives and histories. And so that kind of, it parallels, right? So I'm interested in archives and history. I'm interested in discovering history. I'm interested in interviewing people who have not been interviewed yet. I'm actually not interested in interviewing people who've been interviewed a lot. I think that's pointless to do. It's a waste of time. I am not interested in doing that, really. I like the person who says, "Oh no, I've never done this, or I've never told my story before. No one's ever asked me." That's who you want to interview, right? That's the good stuff. So anyway, so there's that link. I think I read the first 3 sentences and then I got busy. I couldn't, I look forward to reading it. The photos look nice.
They do.
Yeah, are you looking at it?
I opened it up
I'm very
and it looks
excited
great.
about it. So nice. Devin
Congrats.
hooked up that whole thing. He's been very supportive of my work. There's another residency I did with him at Cal State Dominguez Hills, where he's a professor, and the library there, they have on the 5th floor. It's called the Girth Archives, and that's their special collection. And they acquired the Ninomiya Photo Archive, which is about something like 150,000 images of Japanese American history in Los Angeles. And when they got it, Greg Williams, who's the director there, and Devin had a meeting, and Devin's the one who proposed, maybe you should get an artist in resident for this. And so they called me. And so that went really, really well. You have to also like to hang out with that branch of scholars, I mean, we say academics, but it's so broad, it's kind of like saying doctors, but there's like, all these different kinds of doctors. And in this particular discipline, conservationists, archivists, these are very specific kind of academics, and you have to really enjoy hanging out with these kinds of people. And hours and hours and hours in a library where it's usually very quiet, but you're like discovering, right? They're like bringing you those archival boxes and you're opening them up, and it's like, and they also, they already did that, right? They already did, right? So, but they watch you go, and they go, yes, isn't that amazing? It's like we're all getting excited together, discovering these artifacts, basically, right? And in the case of Girth Archive, because it's a relatively new facility, that is happening all the time. And it's diverse. It's not just Japanese American history. They're collecting the history of gospel music in Los Angeles and Esperanto. They have a whole collection on Esperanto. So it's very diverse.
That's great.
Yeah. So once you get in, and once they kind of understand what you do and they trust you, it's all about trust, right? Then they ask, how they asked me again for the Art Kunken. And I'm so happy about it. I feel so lucky to be given that opportunity. But it doesn't come overnight. It's like years and years of work and trust.
I think that goes into something else that came up.
I mean, Cognate Collective is the same thing, right? You've been working with some of these folks for a long time, so to do what you want to do, you can't just show up and do it. You got to build the relationships, and then you slowly build into something more complicated, right?
I think that that's something that came up in a lot of the questions that students had submitted, just how the question of access, right? And especially getting access to some of these buildings, to some of these spaces that are at times like literally considered sacred.
Yeah,
right.
No,
but also historic, of like just great historical significance. And I think that you spoke a little bit about that throughout your presentation, and I think are speaking about it now. And I think that's an interesting also aspect of this practice that is, when we think about like practice, there's a timeline and a process, right, to much of this work, and a history to projects that precede them, and that kind of lay the groundwork. But I don't know if there's any perhaps specific aspect of that. I think you spoke about trust. Maybe like, could you say a little bit about how that trust building is built with some of the institutions that you're interfacing, like the Peace Museum, for example. Like, if you can like just walk us through in terms of the process of like initial reaching out to someone and how to cultivate those relationships.
You know, the nice thing about the Japanese American community here in LA is, one, there's lots of people from Hiroshima, after the war here. So there's that. In fact, the Hiroshima Cultural Center is, as far as I know, seems to be the only organization that's city specific from Japan that has their own building in Little Tokyo, right? There's the Okinawa Association, but that's in Gardena. So in Little Tokyo, like there's the Tokyo Cultural Center or Osaka Cultural Center, but there's a Hiroshima Kenkai. Yeah, so that tells you how many people. So there's kind of an understanding of the complexity of what that means, right? Because Hiroshima is not just about the bomb, right? In fact, most people today, especially younger people, they don't really care about the bomb. Like it's kind of a, yeah, that happened here, but we moved on, kind of a feeling. I would say that my experience of working in bureaucracies has often paid off. And what does that mean? So something I haven't mentioned is that I worked for the Los Angeles County Metro for 25 years. I was a public arts coordinator for the LA Metro. So I got to work with communities and hire artists to create public artworks for the stations, subway stations and train stations, and in some cases, bus stations. So after 25 years, there's a kind of a bureaucracy government culture that you inherently learn, although I was usually the buffer between the artist and this government culture, right? That was my job, was to be the translator in a sense for those two professions, if you will. But it did help, and there's a kind of a logistics that probably would drive most people crazy, that I'm completely comfortable like waiting and kind of like talking with people and sort of making them feel comfortable so that they can work with, so we can work together, basically. Like it's kind of an art in itself, if you will. But of course, it can't come from a manipulative place. It has to come from a very compassionate, like honest place. And so I've been, and I don't do it intentionally, but somehow I think I have this thing that I can do, and it's helped my career immensely. So when I came back from the aha moment of, oh, this is what I want to do, I called the Japanese American Culture and Community Center. And they basically said, we can't really help you because we don't know those people, but we recommend call this person at the Japanese consulate. I said, okay, thank you. So I called the person at the Japanese consulate and she was awesome. And she goes, oh, and again, it's my pitch, right? My pitch, I was so passionate about my pitch, but then I had this government bureaucracy lingo thing that I also is part of my pitch. And so there's a kind of like, I totally understand why you want to do that. So she said, let me, give me a week. Let me do some homework and then I'll get back to you. So, so what she did was she called Hiroshima, and this is the Japanese consulate, so it's like it's the Japanese government. So they're calling the city of Hiroshima, and then she calls me back, and then we talk, and she goes, okay, so this is how you get into the dome. And she goes, but the people I spoke to, they're assholes. We don't want to work with them. This is my idea. I think you at that point, I'm the artist in resident at LADOT, or I'm about to, or something like that. I think that's what's going on. And then she goes, do you know anybody in the mayor's office? And I said, I personally don't know anybody in the mayor's office, but I think I know somebody who might know somebody in the mayor's office. She goes, see if you can get a letter from Mayor Garcetti to Mayor Matsui in Hiroshima. And if you could get that letter, I'm pretty sure we can bypass all these bureaucrats I just spoke to all week. And I said, oh, okay, all right, let's do that. It took 6 months to get this letter, but everybody along the way was like, oh yeah, I got it. I totally understand that project. I want to help you. But it took 6 months. And finally, I got this email from this amazing person who was working for Mayor Garcetti, or Araceli. And she was like, I got the letter. And she attached a PDF of it. She goes, I'm going to send it to Hiroshima now. I'm going to email it to Hiroshima now. And I said, oh my God, this is amazing. And then within 24 hours, Lisa, I got an email from the city of Hiroshima. So, okay, we got this letter from Mayor Garcetti, we're going to make this happen. Please, and it rolled that way. And then serendipitously, I got a call from Art Matters. And they said, oh, you're a finalist. Can you propose a project? And I proposed, going to Hiroshima and doing this. And then, of course, I got the money. They approved it. So it kind of like all the universe lined up basically for that thing. And that was pretty amazing.
Wow, that's
kind of how it happened.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think if anything, it underscores the importance of, or just how collective many of these projects are, right? And like being a community, working community, and I think just building up those networks, right, of support and resources. Not producing in a vacuum.
The artwork has my name on it, but clearly I'm just a conduit for the project, Yeah. It could be somebody else doing the project, but it happens to be my name. None of this happens without all these people, all these amazing people who can get stuff done like that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that resonated for me in terms of what you were sharing is how there's this need to be in dialogue with others, right? To create this type of work, even dialogue with spaces and with histories. I think we were last week speaking with the group Super Future Haunts Collective, who thinks about hauntology and kind of dialogue and discourses with ancestors and with non-human beings that co-inhabit our world in the present moment, but also historically have and continue to linger the kind of echoes and traces of spaces. Right. And I think that came up for some of the students, these kinds of links in terms of the projects that we were looking at last week and your work. And just hearing you speak about how so much of the work is also this notion of like being quiet, like Zen, like this feeling of Zen, and like almost like this religious, spiritual feeling that is evoked. I think is interesting to think about because for many students, they were interested in just this notion of dealing with difficult topics, dealing with trauma through sound, and what that kind of opens up. So I think there was some students, for example, like Alan, who wanted to know if there's a kind of power of silence that allows for more more change or more transformation and interpretation to happen in comparison to noise. And there was other students who were sharing around this notion of generational trauma, right? And how one can kind of unpack that through art and through sound. Michelle, for example, wanted to know just if personally you've experienced a kind of shift in how you understand your own ancestral history, your connection to the land or to people, or even to the future by kind of thinking about sound, thinking about history in the ways that you do in your work.
I think so. I mean, like my immediate ancestral track would be my immediate family, right? I grew up in a restaurant, so my dad was a chef, cook, and my mom was the main waitress kind of thing, small little restaurant. And when you're working in the service industry, there's a kind of unwritten law that the customer is always right. But the misunderstanding of that terminology is that so they're always right, and so that means that sort of kind of assumes that the worker is wrong. So that because it's it's always a binary, right? Unfortunately. And so, but that's not really what's happening. What that means is that you should tell them that they're right. You should apologize, but backstage, they're not right. They're not right, and they're wrong actually. And you're not going to change the way you do whatever they're complaining about, and life goes on, right? Because that's what's most important in a restaurant is the confidence of the culture of your business, not just the food, but everything, right? And so seeing my parents maneuver that a lot, helped me understand like what is it what is it you want to accomplish, right? And there are these people who are going to help you and listen to what they say, but they're not in charge. So it's kind of like that. When I became an arts administrator, Jessica Cusick, who was an amazing mentor for me, she said, before you walk into a meeting, know what you want the outcome to be. And that's very important, right? So as an artist, like the integrity of my work is predicated on not just how I maneuver myself, how I, act and treat people, but also the integrity of like conceptually my aesthetic, that I'm true to my aesthetic, that I don't change just because somebody else tells me to change. That's not what you should be doing, right? You have a vision. It's good to learn, it's good to build upon, but you have to be true to your voice, right? I think for me, becoming an artist, half of my life was about finding my voice. Once I found my voice, then it was like the challenge was to be true to the voice. That's actually harder than finding your voice, is being true to your voice, especially in a capitalist society. I think it's really, really difficult. And so that's why so many people stop being an artist, I think. It's almost kind of impossible, like an impossible thing. But we do it, we do it because we have to. And because we want to. We want to make art. Absolutely, 100% want to make art. Yeah, I want to keep doing this. So, did that answer the question? I think so. Maybe. Try to. I hope so.
Yeah. No, I think it definitely relates to this notion. I think the other thing that we've been speaking about is just how art can be healing, right? I think for oneself, but also potentially invite others to reflect on what healing looks like for them. So thinking about conflict, thinking about trauma, there's a way in which art can become a vehicle for facilitating processes of reflection that might lead to understanding that sort of trauma or conflict in a different way, potentially opening up the way, pathways towards something akin to healing. And I feel like your work does that very beautifully. I think this is also reflected in one of the comments that came in from Jasmine Lee, who writes, "My dad's family is from Hiroshima too, but they immigrated over before World War II. It's interesting to reflect upon the Japanese-American experience through art and sound. Now I'm inspired to do a sound project for Manzanar, like you did for the Atomic Dome, if I ever visit again." So it wasn't a comment, or a question, but more of a comment that they wanted to share.
Nice. Thanks, Jasmine.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, definitely.
I would recommend, in terms of recording at Manzanar, to get a good quality screen for your microphone. That fuzzy thing that you put on the mic. It's so windy over there sometimes, and all that dust and stuff, kind of intense. I would highly recommend getting, really investing in a good screen.
Yeah, definitely. And we also did have another question from Jenna. She wanted to know what set you on your path to discovering why people leave the church/religion. And they find this topic fascinating because she writes, I'm more spiritually inclined. So, yeah.
As I mentioned, my grandmother was Shinto, and my grandfather's family was Buddhist, but clearly he didn't care about it. He never went to temple. The only time we went to temple was if someone died or someone was getting married. That was pretty much it. And so I didn't really grow up in a religious family. I mean, I didn't grow up in a religious family, period. But as most Japanese families have a butsudan, so there is still a butsudan in the family house, which is kind of a small little shrine, and then the people who die in the family usually have a photo of them in there. There's a little bell you hit, little incense thing, you do a quick prayer, that kind of thing. That was in the house. But my schooling, like in middle school, I went to a religious science school. And then in high school, I went to a all-boy Catholic high school. And so I got glimpses of these religions. And so as you grow older, you start to meet people who've left their religion, right? And usually the reasons are fairly profound. There's usually, so I've always been fascinated. It's not something I all of a sudden started thinking about. I've been kind of thinking about this all my life, but as I'm at the Pasadena Buddhist temple, one of the issues that comes up often, especially with the Reverend, is the decrease of membership. People are either passing away or they're leaving the temple. And then certainly the younger folks aren't coming to the temple. And so there's this one question mark about the future of the temple, but two, how can we get the younger folks to come to the temple? And I think, the assimilation thing is really heavy. And so I think that's part of it. And then, of course, they're part of a national organization. And turns out all the Buddhist temples are having this problem. And then I start talking to people who are Catholic and they say, oh yeah, Catholic churches across the board are having the same problem. So everyone's having the same problem, right? So that's something that I've become aware of in the past 4 years because I'm very close to the people in that dialogue now. So as we all know, in recent times, there's been some major polarizing in our country, and really deep issues have been surfacing. And I had this thought late last year. I thought, I wonder if there's something about religion. This is like a very pagan kind of thought. It's like, I wonder if there's something about religion that, since we're abandoning it as a society, are we losing something, some sort of processing or mechanism that has caused this polarization to flourish? And so that was my thought. And so I thought, well, let's start with leaving your religion. I've heard so many amazing stories. I bet I'm thinking if I collected all of these things and created a sound environment, sort of performatively, that experience might be religious. So as a sound artist, that was my first step into, delving into this theory. It's like, what? And so actually in the project with Prospect Art, they teamed me up with a sort of a religion theorist. And that dialogue has been amazing. We're going to have another major dialogue in 2 weeks. And of course, he's written books about this, and he's been an amazing resource for me. So, I mean, am I interested in religion? No, I'm not really interested in religion. I'm interested in the function of religion, which is very different, and could I possibly help the Pasadena Buddhist Temple increase their membership? I don't know, maybe, it'd be great if there's somehow the artist can help do that. I don't know. I don't really have an answer to that right now, but it's something that I think about a lot, especially as I interview the elders, and they talk about what it used to be. Hundreds and hundreds of Japanese families living in that area.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess when I think of religion, part of it is also some place that you go to search for hope and like solace. And I think that that's something that we're all looking for, given the many crises that we're going through. That a lot of students kind of reflecting in some of the questions about the parallels of war, that you're kind of thinking about the historical parallels to present conflicts happening in the Ukraine and Russia, you know, situation. And this is maybe just to end because I'm conscious of the time. Something that came up last week also that I thought was a really nice way of ending that conversation is just asking the artists where they're kind of finding hope and what they're hopeful for the future. And you shared that nascent notion of Asian American futurism and thinking about the future. So just for you, kind of in this present moment, is there something that's giving you hope for the future that you can maybe share with us to give us a little bit of hope as well?
Well, I don't know if this is hopeful, but so as I've been mulling in my brain all of the facets or potential facets of this Asian American futurist concept, I was thinking this is a good opportunity to ban the entire continent. So when I say Asian American, it tends to be United States based. But often when I talk to my friends who are from different parts of South or Central America, certainly Canada, they're always sort of dismissive of the United States arrogance. How they say, for instance, like the baseball World Series, for instance, champions of the world, but that they're the United States of America. And it's not really the United States of America. It's the United States of of a section of North America, really, right? And so I thought, well, maybe we can talk about the Asian Pacific Rim diaspora as it pertains to not just North America, but South and Central America, and because there are so many artists of that diaspora in various parts of South and Central America and Mexico and what have you. And so is this the opportunity to somehow bridge to these art collectives out there and artists and say, hey, what would happen if we went beyond the government borders that we're sort of governed by? And so it's kind of an abstract notion, but it's something that I think it's a topic that has come up so much, sort of the power of the United States and how it's sort of, because paralleling that, of course, is, and this is not just Asian countries, but well, here, this is the best example of what I'm trying to express, this next point, and that is, I love eating, right? You love eating. So we lived in Los Angeles, right? I'm living in Los Angeles. And throughout the decades, we've become this food capital, like there's a lot of Michelin stars popping up here in Los Angeles. Why is that? Oh, could it be that we keep going to a different country and bombing the shit out of it? And then those immigrants have to leave those places because we put up these puppet governments or, anti-people governments, and then they end up coming to the country that actually, paid for the bombing and stuff, or even bombed in my case. And then because of the nature of Southern California or the West Coast, the enclave, that sort of xenophobic culture that America likes to, that's America is actually predicated on, allows for the food to be fairly authentic, And so that's why there's such great food in Los Angeles, for instance, right? Or San Diego or San Francisco or any metropolis on Seattle. That's why, because this relationship with war and bombing and immigration, and then surviving as a culture. My one of my residencies was in Little Saigon, and when the boat people were coming, it's such a horrible term, boat people, but when those Vietnamese were fleeing Vietnam, they came to the United States. Primarily, they were sponsored by various religious organizations or nonprofits, primarily in the Midwest, and a lot of them, but many of them came to the West Coast as well. So within a very short amount of time, as they were communicating with each other, it's like, how you doing? Oh man, cold as shit here in Michigan, Detroit or whatever. Chicago's freezing. Oh God, that sounds terrible. We're in this place called Orange County, and it's really nice. The weather's awesome, and there's lots of farmland. So we're actually growing all of our Vietnamese vegetables and stuff. And it's, if you want to come, you should come. There's lots of apartments and stuff. And then slowly, boom, boom, boom. Did you know, I think we talked about this, but I'm just going to ask you, like we've never talked about this before. Did you know that for a while, for several years, Vietnamese pop music was not coming out of Vietnam. It was coming out of Orange County. There were 7 recording studios in Orange County.
Wow, that's incredible.
Right? So all the pop music was coming out. So, I mean, that's just one example, right? But across the board, there's at least one good restaurant in Los Angeles, right? When I say one good restaurant, I'm saying like authentic, like the people from that country. Oh yeah, that's just like how my grandmother makes that, or my aunt makes that, right? And so it's this weird, really weird relationship with destroying and then cultivating, destroying and cultivating. It's very destructive.
Yeah, I think the kind of cycle of destruction and creation is interesting to consider. And I think within that, what you're articulating for me is also bringing up the sense of resilience, right? And I think it's also interesting to think about an artist that we looked at earlier in the semester in my class is Sun Ra, and this notion of Afrofuturism, of course, which relates to this conversation. And one of the songs that I've just been thinking about in this moment of conflict is a song where the lyrics are, "It's past the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's past the end of the world. Don't you know that yet?" And I think it points us to this fact that we speak about, oh, it's like the end times, or the world is going to end. But actually, the world has already ended for so many peoples around the world, right? Like through war, through conflict, through forms of genocide. There have been multiple apocalypses that have taken place for different communities, and yet they're still here, right? And we continue to kind of preserve their cultures and their traditions through food, for example. So I think that there is, in as much as it's important to think about these forms of conflict and destruction, there is, as you say, always creation that persists and resists. And I think that, again, the work that you do in thinking about sound and working within these buildings that encapsulate and are linked to this history really points us to that in a really powerful and poetic way. So thank you so much for sharing your work, Alan. And thank you everyone for attending tonight's presentation of Resounding Visions. Next week we're off because it's spring break, but we will be back the week afterwards. We hope you'll join us again. For those students who are in my class, we can stick around for just a sec to connect. And for everyone else, thank you so much for attending. Thank you again, Alan, for sharing your work and your thinking around.
You want me to stay for the class, or am I leaving?
No, we'll let you go to sleep or get some rest. Yeah, thank you. We've kept you up long enough.
Good to see you.
It was great to see you too. Yeah. And yeah, thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for attending tonight's presentation. And Yeah, students stick around, students from my class stick around, and we'll connect in just a second, all right?